Latino. Good morning, Russ.
Good morning. How are you?
Where did it come from?
I have no idea.
It's one of those things. I'm not sure if it came from the Farmer's Almanac, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas.
It sounds like one of those things. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if Groundhog Day, if it actually is true, or if it has some modicum of truth. But in the state of Mississippi, it's in like a lion in some parts of the state. We hope that's about all that we get. Good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing
good
well.
Good to have you.
Good to be here.
A little rain on the outside?
A little bit.
Yeah.
You were pointing this out, that anytime you have that huge fluctuation in temperatures, you pay for it on the back end.
You are going to if it gets up to 80 degrees in February or early March, you're going to pay for it. Let me finish this one real quick. This is on the House passing this Equality Act. Have you been keeping up with that?
I have not.
The bill goes on to say, with respect to gender identity, an individual should not be denied access to shared facilities, including a restroom, if your daughter is in a locker room, buck naked, getting dressed, a dressing room that's in accordance with the individual's gender identity. But that gender identity permits them to go in there if they just say that they feel like they're identifying as a female. Now, for all of those who are gatekeepers and trying to keep others from their daughters to their wives safe, this has got to be a landmine filled with IEDs waiting to explode with, sharp legal shrapnel fragments from lawyers out there. So the Democrats have included this language. Let me give you this language here. The definition of gender identity contained in the H.R. 5 is not meant to be construed in a manner that would require employers to identify, stereotype, or make assumptions about employees' or job applicants' gender identity. So if for some reason you have, as an employer, say, you don't look like a woman, rather, the definition should be construed in a manner that allows an employee or job applicant to represent their gender identity to the employer, if necessary, in a manner that allows for discussion without discrimination. A discussion without discrimination means that the person who says they're identified as a female, you better listen to me or I'm going to get a lawyer. Is that the way you would interpret that?
First, I would say that we're talking about the U.S. House of Representatives, just for clarity. This is not something that Speaker Gunn is pushing. I think we are living in strange and peculiar times, and that we're redefining social norms that have been accepted for thousands of years, or attempting through central government to redefine social norms that have been accepted for thousands of years.
Apparently you don't want to talk about this issue then, so we'll move on to something else.
I addressed it. I don't know what more you wanted me to say.
I do want to talk about this, though. We are, as far as the income tax bill, it has created a brouhaha in the House and Senate. Specifically in the Senate and in the governor's office. Your thoughts, an overview before we get to the next segment.
So I would say this. You and I were talking about this off air. You've worked for decades now in the radio business promoting conservative ideas. There are people listening right now who have worked for Republican candidates, given money to Republican candidates, Republican women groups across the state. We did all of this for the purpose of trying to advance good conservative ideas. The reason that people invested in Republicans was not to get them elected. It was to ultimately see the benefit of good ideas put into law to transform the state of Mississippi. If you're a conservative or if you're a Republican, the idea of eliminating the income tax should be one that we can all unify around, rally around. That doesn't mean that there can't be disagreement on how we do it. But the goal of this should not be to poke and prod and play gotcha along the way. The goal should be to keep our eyes on the prize, to ultimately get to the point where we can do something transformative like eliminating the income tax. And so I think House Bill 1439 is a great starting point for a conversation. I think it was done in a very thoughtful way. I think it was done in a very deliberate way if you look at the actual contents of the bill. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. But if I were in the governor's office or if I was in the lieutenant governor's office, I think what I'd be trying to figure out is how do we make this better, not necessarily how do we stop this.
A lot said there, and as far as HB 1439, I do agree with it. I think where I have a disagreement or I have some angst in this is that, and you are right, for years and years we went through the total domination from the Democrats, who stopped everything. They wanted to spend more money. They didn't worry about a rainy day fund. They would pour more money into something. They were not looking for a performance-based agencies anywhere. And that was the mindset. Anything thinking out of the box, they wouldn't do it. For years and years and years, we talked about changing the flag under the Democrats. It never happened. We talk about education. They came up with all of these grandiose ideas, and they just really never happened. So when we had Republicans finally in control, and certainly a little bit later in supermajorities, you didn't expect them to fight like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. And that's not, I don't think anybody in the state wants that. The problem that I have with this is that, and it's to me a kind of a new phenomenon here, which harkens back to the days of total Democrats, but not under total Republicans, where you have people seem to be jockeying for position in the next election. And it's so viable and tangible that sometimes it's almost like you've put it on a billboard.
Yeah, I don't know who's jockeying for what. I think for people who...
I don't think it's one or two people. I think it's a multitude
a lot of people. So I think if you're on the inside, it feels apparent that there's all of this tension. And if you're on the outside, and by that I mean the average citizen, they're looking at it going, why aren't big things happening? Right? So they don't care about who's jockeying for position. Mm-hmm. They care about, are these guys that I elected to do big things going to do them or not? And I think at some point, if you're someone who is jockeying for position, you've got to realize that if you don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day, you're not going to be successful even if you have higher ambitions. And so the question is, can the disparate parties, to the extent that they are disparate, come together to do something big? And I would argue that eliminating the income tax is pretty high on that list. I mean, it would make us the 10th state without an income tax. If you look at the other 9 states that don't have income taxes, Paul, they're all kicking our butt. And they're not just kicking our butt, they're kicking national average butt.
No, I totally agree, and I'm 100% for this. I just wish it had been done in a different atmosphere. I wish the environment was one where early on in the process, the House and Senate were both working on this, and they were both on the same accord. This is what we need to do, and they were, as Republicans, unified, not one sending to the other. And I cannot be a hypocrite on this, Russ. If it was in the U.S. Congress or here, anytime you have a 300 or 400 page document that has this type of a mandate for the public for the foreseeable future, you need time to look it over. And I have problems with that to the point where I wished back in the early days in January that this thing was formulated, and if you can't do it, then you go through the obligatory study committee. But I'd love to get it passed now, but I wish that this was done in a different manner.
Yeah, I think it's easy in hindsight to look at it and say, things could have been done differently. And I think that
if you're working on it for 5 years, you ought to be able to have that on the basis of knowing when you can release it.
I understand where you're coming from, and I think that's a fair criticism or a fair sort of critique of the way that the process has unfolded. I think there are a lot of different things happening there where it's very easy to not be able to build the kind of momentum that you need to get something across the finish line. And so it's always a balancing act between how do you ensure that you get something out of the gate before it gets killed, and then how do you get the necessary buy-in. I would argue that there needs to be better buy-in. Even if it's something where this year it doesn't get done, it gives us an opportunity to go around the state and really think about, like, how do we get more people to understand this concept? How do we get more people behind it? Because we did a study over the last several months, and it was not related to what the House was doing, but in some ways mirrors a lot of those elements. And what we saw, we brought in an economist from Rice University.
Wait, hold that. I want to talk about when you come back.
Sure.
Because when you start looking at all the numbers, the number one issue in here as far as against is just human, just
it's
the
complex.
Normal thought of, wait a minute, I'd love to have this, and I want my money from the income tax. If I'm at about 50,000, I can make $2,000, and I think this is wonderful. But I don't want to pay any additional taxes.
Sure.
And it's just not going to happen. Even though if we sit down on a piece of paper and show you, you'll come out ahead. It's just being human. And it happens. And it's frustrating, but it's just part of it. 805, Judy Glenn, real estate agent. We'll talk to her about SB 2624. Russ Latino's with me. Let's take a quick shopping break. Back with more. We get back to Russ Latino, and we're talking about the tax bill. As far as the organization, how's things going there?
Going great. I was saying before the break, we put together a study over the last 3 months that does both a comparative analysis versus the states that don't have income taxes, looking at tax burden, looking at revenue growth, looking at overall economic performance, population growth. Across the board, the states without income taxes are not only destroying the state of Mississippi, I mean, by orders of magnitude better in terms of economic growth, income levels, population growth, but they're also destroying national averages. So about 36% above national average on economic growth and more than double population growth. And so in a state where we've had stagnant economy, stagnant population growth, that shows that there's a path to do this. The other thing that we've done is we brought in an economist from Rice University, Dr. George Barrow, to do a dynamic economic analysis on what would happen in the state of Mississippi under a couple of different scenarios if they eliminated the income tax. And under both scenarios, what he came back with was we'll see increased productivity, increased income levels, the economy is going to grow, consumption is going to grow, housing values will go up. And it's because the form of taxation and a consumption tax in a lot of ways is a fairer, broader-based form of taxation. So here's what I would say, Paul, is in the whole debate about process, there are going to be some legitimate points. In the debate about the specifics of the bill, there are going to be legitimate debate points that need to be hashed out. But Republicans and conservatives should keep their eye on the prize. We have the opportunity to do something transformative in eliminating the income tax. House Bill 1439 is a vehicle to do that can be built upon. And we should look at it and say, if we want to increase productivity, if we want to grow our economy, this is a path to do that and shouldn't allow any of the sort of side conversations to distract us from that.
Well, I know, but human nature is that you have to sell this to the voting public one way or the other.
No doubt.
And we're talking about House Bill 1439. And my guest, of course, is Russ Latino, president, Empower Mississippi. You know, I was mentioning this to you during the break. The reason I like this bill, I think we and I've been talking about this, we've got to get this done. If you put together, in my mind, if you put together this bill, it would be transformative, probably more than just about anything else. And I was mentioning it on the air last week, in the same way as far as image and everything else, it's a lot like changing the flag. These are hard things to do, and I understand that. But you put this together with MFLEX, which I think is a great proposal that's moving through the legislative process, and they're both working on this one. The SWIB board, the workforce development that we're doing, the low cost of living in the state of Mississippi, where we are now as far as our educational level, there are a lot of good things happening. This would be tantamount to all of those as far as becoming competitive in the southern region of the country. As far as and I'm not sure exactly what it would do as far as cost of living index.
Yeah, so what our study found was that you would see some increase in things like home values, but that's because people have more disposable income to put into nicer homes, right? And so on net, people are going to have more ability to either save or consume because of this bill. I mean, if you said we need to sell it, I agree with you. I mean, here's how I would sell it. If you're a working person in the state of Mississippi, starting in 2022, if you make under $50,000 as an individual, you won't pay any income taxes. That's $2,000 in your pocket to invest in a business, put braces on your kid. If you're a married couple, you won't pay any income taxes on the first $100,000. Now, people would say, well, what about the consumption tax increase or the upward adjustment of the consumption tax? It is still a net reduction in the amount of taxes that working people will pay.
I think the level that we talked about is if you're making $50,000, and again, it applies to less than that, it applies to more than that. But if you're making $50,000, you're getting $2,030 back that you'll keep. It will not be taken out of your check. In punishing you with a tax for working, basically that's what income tax is, then you've got to go out and spend $82,000. You've got to go out and make $82,000 of purchases. And as was noted
on a $50,000 income.
On a $50,000 income. Now, if you do that annually, you've got problems other than income tax.
Correct.
And then you step up to $100,000, and it's over $4,000 that you're going to get back over a period of just 10 years. That's $40,000 of income that you were allowed to keep.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Look, it is a net tax reduction. Here's the other thing that people aren't pointing out. Colorado's got something called TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and it limits the amount of money that can be spent by the Colorado State Legislature. It's been controversial out there. It hasn't been able to be duplicated anywhere else. House Bill 1439 has a spending rule, or a fiscal rule they call them, that is actually stronger than TABOR. It says government can only grow at 1.5% a year. And so people don't realize this. So if you look at the bill, that first tax cut on the $100,000 and under for people who are couples is paid for by upward adjustments in consumption taxes. The next $600 to $700 million is a legitimate cut that happens because you're restraining the growth in spending in government. And so, like, if you're a conservative and you're like, we want smaller government, this gives you smaller government in a sustainable way that doesn't scare off all those people who would say, don't do Kansas again, right? The Kansas experiment where they had to repeal their income tax cuts because they kept spending money hand over fist without making adjustments to their spending.
Yeah, but
this bill accounts for all that, Paul.
I understand that, but you sell that to the people like Nancy Loom at the Parents Campaign.
Yeah, well, we shouldn't be worried about selling to Nancy Loom at the Parents Campaign. We should be worried about the people who have invested their energy and their resources in electing Republicans and conservatives to do conservative things that ultimately benefit all Mississippians.
And this will, and there again is my disenchantment with this whole process that the House and Senate are not working together, that it was dropped a bill that big, that important, that bombastic on the future of the state, at the last minute to meet a deadline, and you would hope they would do something like MFLEX. MFLEX is working through the House and Senate, and why can't we do that?
I think there's room for everyone involved to work together better. There's no doubt about that. We are where we are. The question is, in this current environment, can Republicans rally around a Republican idea to get it done for the state of Mississippi? I think if you look at the governor's track record, he's been talking about eliminating the income tax for, a decade now. Yeah. If you look at Speaker Gunn's record,
has he come up with a plan?
So I think that's the question is, instead of looking at the plan that's out there and nitpicking it, can we come together and say, well, here's how I would actually improve it?
Yeah. Well, the other part of that is, and then you have people in the agriculture sector, they're not happy with their tax increase on machinery from 1% to... what is it, 2.5%, 3.5%?
It's a 2.5 percentage point increase.
Yeah.
It's still less than half of what the citizens pay in general sales tax. So one of the sort of dishonest or disingenuous parts of some of this conversation is people saying things like, well, my sales tax is going up by 250%. The reality is for decades, certain industries haven't been paying sales taxes, or they've been paying it at a dramatically reduced rate. And so what we're really talking about is an increase that's commensurate with the general sales tax. It's still less than half of the general sales tax.
What I think a good sales point bit, and sometimes visual is good, what is a good sales point is to have a graph on a pie that shows exactly how many people in the state are paying sales taxes.
Sure.
Or income tax, I should say. And color the ones that are getting by, not paying sales tax as far as the colored part, and then the underground part also a little color on what they're, because it's a large segment.
Well, look at it this way: our state economy was about $115 billion last year. Mm-hmm. We paid sales taxes on about $53 billion worth of purchases. So basically, 1 out of every 2 items we currently pay sales tax on.
Wow.
A lot of that makes some sense, but a lot of it is just exemptions that have been carved out over decades.
So wait a minute,
for
you're
people with
saying
good lobbyists.
53% of the people, 53 million was in sales taxes?
No, so we had 53 billion in gross sales, and about 3.2 billion of that was sales tax collection. But our total economy is 115 billion.
So that leaves 62 out there somewhere.
That no sales tax is being paid on, right?
Wow.
So if you can broaden the base, you actually don't have to bring the rate up very much.
Want to give final segment here?
Yeah, sure.
Wrap it up from the president of Empower Mississippi, Russ Latino. We'll do that. Final thoughts here, because you guys are working on some other things too. You were working on the occupational bills that are moving through. Where is that?
So in different places, to be honest with you, right? So I know we talked about nurse practitioners, and that became a hot button issue.
That's dead, isn't it?
Hobb has announced that he's not going to bring that out. Chairman Brian has announced that he's not bringing it out.
Dead, or is it dead?
Well, tomorrow is the deadline. For things to come out of committee. So it'll be dead tomorrow, I suspect, barring some intervention. Look, I continue to think that's a good idea. I think that it's one of those things that hopefully we can get around the state and build some support for. Between now and next session, we're undeterred in believing that that's a good way to get affordable health care to more Mississippians with quality care that's provided by nurse practitioners. I think there are a couple of other occupational licensing bills. There's the cosmetology bill that's still floating around out there. It's amazing how much attention that thing draws. There's obviously Speaker Gunn's bill to eliminate some of the licensing boards. And there's a universal recognition bill that would allow people from out of state to come in. We'll see how all that unfolds. Empower last year and for several years running has worked on criminal justice reform bills. And we've got 4 that we're watching pretty closely right now. Parole reform bill that we think has got a lot of potential. Made it through both chambers last year, ultimately to get a veto towards the end of the session. We believe that there's been effort and are efforts being made to address some of the concerns that the governor expressed. And so think that that's got real potential to help address Mississippi's prison crisis. There is a habitual reform bill still alive that we're interested in that would say, hey, look, if your third offense in the 3 strikes and you're outlaw is a nonviolent drug offense, we probably shouldn't pay to put you in prison for the rest of your life. That seems like a waste of taxpayer resources. And so it's right-sizing that law to make sure that the sentencing laws are set up the right way, that we're not, paying to keep somebody in prison for 50 years for having 7 boxes of Sudafed on them, which is a real story. And then, I think we're also looking at things like the teacher reciprocity bill that passed out of the Senate. We thought it was a good piece of legislation that the Lieutenant Governor and Chairman DeBarr have supported, with the thought that we need to get more teachers into Mississippi. And one way to do that is to make it easier for people to move in and teach. Mm-hmm. We've got a teacher shortage. And so lots of things alive. Obviously, we're keenly interested in what happens with the income tax bill. We think it's a unique opportunity.
Now, that bill also is deadline tomorrow. Or is it a different deadline?
No, it's got a different deadline.
Because of appropriations?
Because it's a revenue bill, yeah.
Well, I'm a little bit dismayed to not hear you bring up one of the more important things as far as occupation is concerned. That's the wigologist.
That's tied up in the cosmetology bill, or it was for a little while.
Will and I want to know where the wigologists
with bated
are.
breath, we're waiting.
Yeah, it's amazing. Given the opportunity to exert power over something, government will. Right?
Will's made most of Will's time here in the day is taken up from calls
about wigology
from all over the state. How many wigologists?
Master wig makers, master hair people are calling me left and right, wanting to know.
They have threatened to march on the Capitol.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes.
I'm sure. Well, Will is also an expert in wigs, right?
Yes.
That's kind of his thing?
Yeah, he doesn't wear one, but he has a master's degree in wigology. So I'm just telling you, they need to bring something together on this thing.
It's amazing the little constituencies that can move the legislature sometimes. When you take a step back and go, really? You're not going to get me put out of office, so maybe I don't have to protect your individual industry.
Well, and the other thing, too, sometimes you kick a nest and you didn't think there was many fire ants in it, like the auctioneers, because the auctioneers were not happy with that bill.
Well, they can just talk really fast. It seems like there's more because there's so many words they can fit in. I'm teasing.
Ben Shapiro could do it without. Ben Shapiro could do that without auctioneering. Can you imagine Ben Shapiro auctioneering?
He'd be very good at it.
We'd never know because it passed by so fast.
You'd have to slow him down, I think.
Yes, you would have to slow him down.
Do you remember in the 1980s there was this thing called Micro Machines, and they would have the guy come on. It was a little car. It was a toy.
Yeah.
And the commercial was a guy that would come on, and he was like a speed talker.
I saw him the other day on YouTube.
Okay.
He's still around there. I forgot the guy's name.
He also did FedEx. Remember he had
Oh,
a
yes,
FedEx
he did
commercial.
FedEx.
So Ben
Just
Shapiro is
amazing.
like a high-pitched version of that guy.
God, it's like he's like this guy on helium.
Yes, correct.
This guy on helium, and is he down? He's down to 2 hours now. He's out of breath at about 2 hours and decided I can't do this for 3.
Well, so you do it for 3, and you've done it for a couple decades.
Yeah, but I don't talk
so
as
low
fast
and
as
slow
him.
matters.
A couple of decades, yeah, a couple of decades. Russ, always good seeing you, sir.
Good seeing you, man.
Judy Glenn, you have any remarks as far as the real estate bill? You follow that at all?
I'll be honest and say I haven't.
That's a cop-out. You know I can read your body language, but you're using the bumper to get out
I hear
of
music,
this.
Paul. There's sweet music playing.
Hey, come on. Thank you, Russ. Appreciate it,
Thank you.
sir. We will take a quick